Okay, so I have 6:15, so I am going to call to order the December meeting for the Board of Health, Chelmsford, Massachusetts. And as our first order of business, I'm going to ask that people can look over the minutes. I heard a ding dong.
Okay.
Richard, when you're ready,
Yes.
make
Yes.
a motion to accept.
Yes, I'll make a motion to, should I do them separate or do you want them together or
Oh, for the, oh, wait, we have,
for the minutes? We have two, November 2nd and November 18th.
Rich, I do need them. I do need them
Yeah.
separate. Yeah.
You need them separate. Okay.
Yes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the November 2nd, 2020 board meeting.
I will second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Unanimous. And
And then I will also put a motion forward for the November 18th, 2020 Board of Health meeting minutes to approve.
I will second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will hold the hearing until Miss Emery can participate.
Yeah.
So put that aside and go to incoming correspondence.
Okay.
Lots of incoming correspondence this month.
Yeah,
Yes.
because there's nothing else happening, right, Sue?
Yeah, exactly.
One that was interesting to me was the 2729 Summer Street. DEP is doing some kind of monitoring of that area, and they're talking about an old site at 20 Boston Road.
So that was behind the old Stop and Shop.
Yeah.
There was an area behind there where there was somebody had reported, oh, it's easily a year ago already,
Okay.
that, you know, they found what they thought was oil on top of the water. We had gone out, we kind of looked at it, DEP came in, they started doing, it took them a long time. They were doing a lot of monitoring and they found out, and actually it just so happens that Todd's on this call with us tonight by chance, and he's well aware of what was going on with this situation, that they ended up finding an underground tank, and it was leaking. And so that had to be, so they've been, that has since been removed, correct, Todd?
Yeah,
And then they're monitoring it.
they had a 10,000 gallon tank with roughly anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 left of product actually left in the bottom of it. It was pretty well hidden. The tap, it was probably at one point like a underground home heating storage for the building. Probably got converted to a generator, and then when the generators got converted to natural gas, they just cut the taps, the fill taps off and just covered it over. And it leached out in a weird way to where the head wall is between the liquor store and the back of the building.
Yeah.
It took them a little bit of time to find it. They removed it. Cheapest, I want to say June, but
Yeah.
and they did remove soil. They removed a decent amount of soil, contaminated soil too. But I think by the cleanup regs, they have to monitor it to make sure but that was the one and only source. So they'll be doing that.
Okay, the shocker of the statement that shocked me was they're saying there's a private well for 2729 in their report. DEP is requesting access to tap water sample from the property at 2729 Summer Street
Where is that?
in the October 30th letter.
No. I don't have the letter. I just
I
need to
think
know where the
that's
street is.
a little further down. So they just want to make sure that it didn't leak down into that.
Yeah, there is. If you get past the brook,
Right.
Yeah.
between the brook and Boston Road, there is no water main. So there is 1 or 2 private wells for consumption in there, I understand.
Yeah, they want to make sure that it didn't get into the private wells.
Really?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never knew that there was a private drinking water wells in any of those homes down there. That was a real
It's only
surprise to
one
me.
it's only 1 or 2 of them, I think, because there is no water main between there and.
That makes the loop, you mean?
There is no loop. It would have been a dead end anywhere but from what I understand, I know there's no water main in the road, so no
Wow.
place those people can get water as well.
Wow. Okay. Well, as I said, it never popped up on anything that I ever saw that showed those houses being on private wells. But that's okay. As I said, it just like it was kind of a shock to me that they found something, but also too that there was a private well there still.
And we pull. I mean, if there were any VOCs, they would have shown up because we pull vastly more water than they would.
Okay.
And it was diesel, so that's going to stay on the top
good.
layer anyways.
That's good. Okay. No, that was the only one out of the group that just kind of caught my eye to be a real shocker. Yeah.
Then if you notice, part of what's also included in the incoming documentation is a letter that Bruce Harper had CC'd me on regarding his concerns in relation to PFAS levels around, Richardson Road and its
Yes.
potential effects on the water. And that was the main reason why I had asked Todd if he could actually participate in tonight's meeting, because there's a new regulation, new requirements by the state around PFAS, and he's the expert in this area. We did include documents in this board packet regarding what, PFAS uses. These all came off of the Chelmsford Water District website, which they have a phenomenal tab on their website specifically related to PFAS. And it's very informative. What are they? Why are they a problem? And then basically it goes into the different products that they're in and the updated requirements by the state in reference to PFAS in the water. So, if anybody has any questions, or I don't know if you want Todd to kind of give us a summary of the new regulations and what the requirements are.
I would.
Yes, I would too. Yes.
Okay, so PFAS, or polyfluorinated compounds, started being produced late 1940s, but really in the 1950s. Non-stick substances and actually firefighting foam. Since then, they have progressed to multiple different types of items. The process of regulation started with what was called the UCMR3 testing protocol. UCMR3 is the uncontaminated monitoring rule, which there are thousands and thousands of contaminants that make a list that there are no regulations on, and they finalize the list down to 21 about every 5 years, and you go through a testing protocol. We are required, because of the size of our utility, to actually participate in that. The only problem with it is the methods are usually the first time through. They're usually all new methods, so your detection limits probably aren't as sensitive as you would like them to be. We did go through it, and we didn't detect any. A lot of people associate these chemicals with military bases. airports, and the firefighting foam. Firefighting foam actually probably isn't a current day worry. Massachusetts went through a exchange program where they exchanged out the AAA firefighting foam that had these compounds in it. And you got some back. I know for a fact that Chief Ryan was probably one of the first in line to get to exchange those out. What kind of changed was EPA created a health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion. Most states are using that. It's only for 2 of the compounds, PFOA and PFOS. Please don't ask me to say these words because they're like 4 inches long. Most states use them. There are 15 that aren't, Massachusetts being one of them. The district and I represented the district and with Mass Waterworks at the stakeholders group that helped try to formulate this mass contamination limit. There was a lawsuit brought by the Conservation Law Foundation to either create a treatment technique or an MCL, and the state went with an MCL. But they did it as a group setup or a family. So they took 6 of these and made a limit, and the limit is 20 parts per trillion. To give you an idea, 1 part per trillion is 1 ink drop in 20 Olympic swimming pools. So any combination of these 6 compounds that add up over to 20 puts you in violation, or potentially. The Mass DEP MCL became official on October 2nd. We had been following this along. We wouldn't be, by the regulation, required to actually start sampling until April. We all talked to each other. We saw other things happening. And you all, pretty much a lot of people in town already got the letter that said that we had started the process through DEP. And part of it's that letter. And there'll be others following up with more information. These things are in everything. To give you an idea, I take the sample for the district. To take a sample so that I don't contaminate the sample, I am not allowed to use personal care products 48 hours prior. No soap, no shampoo, no deodorant, no creams, no nothing. I should avoid dental floss. The clothes I wear on sampling day are untreated cotton clothing. So to give you an idea, some on our website, and I recommend, the biggest thing is, if you're going to look for information on this, please find trustworthy information. There are a lot of websites out there that will scare you. I don't mean to diminish this. There's a movie, Dark Waters, about DuPont, where they were manufacturing these. They were releasing parts per million. These people were in direct contact with percent levels of this chemistry, these chemicals. And I don't mean to diminish the impact on those people or those animals. It's horrific. As a water professional, it's somewhat horrifying, but we are not talking about those levels in this MCL. And I just want to be sure we all know that. But some of the things, like we have a list of common household items that contain PFAS. Some prepackaged foods, insect repellent, fabric softener, nail polish, eye makeup, moisturizers, and hand creams. I've already mentioned most of the personal care products. Any non-stick cookware or storage containers, aluminum foil, wrinkle-free clothing, anything waterproof, fire resistant, stain resistant is going to have these things in it. Certain plastic building materials, fast food wrappers, pizza boxes. A large one that has somewhere on the order of thousands of parts per million are the inside of microwave popcorn bags. So it gives you an idea. I'm not kidding you. I saw Eric give me a look, and I'm being honest. These are things that are well known to contain it. One of the sites on our website is called the ITRC. It's the Interstate Regulatory Council. They have a list of everything, of every group that this stuff is used in, and they update it pretty regularly. So basically, if you detect it, you're required, well, whether you detect it or not, you're required to do a confirmation sample. They want to avoid false positive, false negatives. If you do detect it above 20, like Littleton did, you're not necessarily out of compliance yet, but you start the compliance period. The MCL isn't actually violated until you have a full quarter, and if that average is above 20. There are ways to treat it. The most common is what is called granular activated carbon. There are different types of stuff like that. GAC is more sustainable. What we're finding is if the resins get saturated by the end of their lifespan, they have to be incinerated. Currently, there are only 3 incinerators nationally rated to get hot enough to incinerate it. But they're finding that the breakdown compounds of PFAS are still showing up in the aerosol from the incinerators. So they're going back to further study. They're actually looking at plasma as being a way to finally a way to reduce it. They're called forever chemicals. It's not an acute issue. It is a chronic, over a long-term exposure. To be honest with you, most of you already have it in your bloodstream. I believe the US average blood content for these chemicals is around 0.005 nanograms per milligram, whatever that means. To give you an idea, before I came to work for the district, I was an analytical chemist and a microbiologist for 18 years. I'm pretty good at chemistry. This is a little bit above my head stream, and the blood content is well above my content. I do want to read you one, let me find it, one thing from the EPA about the MCL. And it is, where am I? Primarily, there are 3 subgroups that it's probably what they call the sensitive subcultures. Obviously, pregnant women, infants, and people with certain compromised immune systems. But what they do point out is, and this is off the DP website, Mass DEP points out that consuming water with, they call it PFAS6, meaning the 6 compounds, above the recommended limit of 20 parts per trillion does not mean adverse effects will occur. The degree of risk depends on the level of chemicals and the duration of exposure. It's recommended that that individuals in the subcategories contact their medical professionals to see what the personal risk is, basically. And with that, I'll let anybody ask any questions they want.
No, as I said, I've seen it I've heard about it before. Like you said, it's mind-boggling. Particularly, it's mind-boggling as we get into
the thing about these things,
testing in the trillions, 1 in a trillion. It's really getting down there, compared to.
No, I know. And the thing is,
it's like
these things are mobile. Once they hit water, they are extremely mobile in the aquifer. They're finding it in the rainwater. I mean, so it is prevalent. There hasn't been a determined environmental background on it yet, but these things do exist in a lot of different places and a lot of different things. They are mobile in the aquifer. One of the worst groups to be in for this are firefighters. Their equipment is made up in percent levels of this stuff, and the minute the water hits it, it becomes mobile. From my understanding, it's not through absorption; it is through consumption. But they're in the water; they're getting sprayed with it. They breathe it in, whatever. So they are. I know the firefighter groups are looking at it as well.
Okay.
So having some of these bag of popcorn every day. As a combination, it's like there's sometimes like you go looking into stuff and you realize that like basically instant coffee is like 100% gluten, and you didn't really think about that. And in this case, I'm wondering at some point, do I need to tell him, groundwater aside, cut back on the popcorn kind of thing?
Given the numbers I saw, wouldn't be a bad thing.
Okay. Okay, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to sort of deal with the incoming correspondence this time. Might be to kind of take it by section.
Okay.
And if you're about ready to
Excuse me 1 second, Eric. Can I just interrupt for 1 minute? Because
Mhm.
I know that we had advertised the hearing for 6:30. And
Okay.
I know that Paul Haverty is on our call, but I know his time is limited. So Anne Marie had said earlier when she said that she was probably going to be late, to just go ahead as scheduled.
Okay.
So I'm wondering
And-
if we should get to the rest of the incoming after we do the hearing.
Okay. In that case, that we'll go back to the hearing if we have clarified that she is okay with us going on without her.
Okay.
And so this is the hearing basically with regard to our regulations on subsurface sewage and wastewater disposal,
Yeah.
groundwater protection.
Yes. So
Um,
tonight's meeting will be basically, we have a draft copy of the changes, which are significant to the old regulation. Included in the packet is a copy of the current regulation, which was last updated in 1995. And all of the different areas on that regulation that are not going to be carried over in the new one have been crossed out. One of the first things that we would need to change is basically the months in which they're doing, deep observation. But I gave you a copy of both the original and then the draft version. And as we all know, this needs to be updated because the town of Chelmsford has not had to deal with any type of Title V or septic in many, many years. But now that we have the moratorium on, tying into town sewer because we're almost at capacity, we need to have regulations in place as people come to us looking for septic system installs. And we need to have guidelines. So this will be an update to our current regulation. And then we also, of course, abide by the state Title V regulation. And then as we move forward down the road, there is another very in-depth regulation regarding Title V septic install and on-site wastewater treatment. So basically you can compare the current regulation with the changes.
So I think we're going to run into two different things. One is that as a Board of Health, that our eventual goal, did Richard disappear?
No,
there he
I'm
is.
right here. I'm right
Gotcha.
here.
Okay, so we're going to want to eventually get to where we are back to plugging people into sewers. I don't think that we are particularly fond of having septic systems placed permanently. I think that the other thing that we're going to hear, and I think this is why we asked Paul Haverty to be on the call, is that to tell people that the half the land in town is not eligible to do any kind of building because they are zone 2. What was the term that you used, Paul?
Well, the authority of the Board of Health to impose regulations, in particular with regards to what is already governed by Title V, is subject to Mass General Laws, Chapter 111, Section 31. And that particular statute allows boards of health to make reasonable health regulations. So that reasonable is an important term in the statute. There has to be a rational basis associated with whatever regulations are adopted by the board. And when it comes to Title V, this particular statute gets a little bit even more specific. It requires a different notice provision for regulations governing septic systems that go above and beyond the notice requirements for other local Board of Health regulations, such as, you know, the chicken regulations that we did a while back. And it also requires at the end of the process that these regulations have to be filed with the DEP. So DEP is going to assert some oversight in the process. So whatever the board decides it's going to do in terms of imposing regulations has to be carefully considered. And again, if we're talking about a regulation that essentially makes it impossible to do septic systems in half of the town or all of the town or a quarter of the town, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do that, but you've got to have very good reasoning. And in fact, the notice requirements, when they talk about the hearing process,
Right.
it states that prior to the adoption of any such regulations or amendment which exceeds the minimum requirements for subsurface disposal of sanitary sewage as provided by the State Environmental Code, the Board of Health shall state at said public hearing the local conditions which exist or reasons for exceeding such minimum requirements. So again, the Board of Health has to be able to point to local issues that support the need for these requirements that go above Title V. Now, it's very, very common for towns to have Title V requirements, that, local septic requirements that exceed Title V. And, you know, certainly you can take a look at other municipalities and get a sense of those regulations. And the presumption is that they're in existence and have been ongoing, that they're, you know, likely reasonable. They've already been reviewed by DEP and they've been accepted. Where I get a little bit more concerned is where the board is considering something that we don't have an example of another town doing. And in those circumstances, I just want to make sure that the board is able to point to a specific local issue of concern that supports that proposed regulation.
Now, Chelmsford had a long history, from what I understand, of having contaminated and being charged for in the past. And that's the whole reason we went to the sewage system. Can we point back to the past problems as justification, or do we need to sort of look towards similar communities with zone 2s and make sure that we're not the outlier in our regulations?
I would feel comfortable if we were looking at other communities. We're certainly not the only town in the state that has drinking water concerns. Spoken as someone who's from Woburn, you know.
Yes. Well, I'm from Woburn too.
I know that.
From East Woburn.
I lived in East Woburn
and those were my neighbors.
Excuse me 1 minute. I just want you guys to know that.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm sorry.
Oh God. Well, now.
I was just gonna say, Anne Marie just called in, but.
Okay.
So.
Okay. But no, I think the bottom line has been that in 1984, when we first came up with this modification of the regulation, as we were waiting for sewer to reach all those areas. Number one, the state was basically after the town to order us, and we came within a hair's breadth of being ordered to 100% sewer, the exact area that we're talking about, the zone 2s. They said everybody in this area has to be, because of all the history of contamination, whether it was residential, commercial, or whatever. And therefore the decision was made at that point that everybody was. I mean, and then we turn around in 96, right after the changeover in Title V, and decided to the rest of the town. But focusing on the zone 2 area, there isn't any question about the fact that there was numerous problems in town. We were going to be ordered that everybody in that area had to be sewered. We basically set up a sewer program to bring sewer to every single piece of property. And I don't think the fact that the capacity issue at some point in time afterwards becomes an issue, all of a sudden negates all the past actions, okay, of the sewer commission, of the Board of Health and whatever, and the town who came up with $150+ million to basically sit there and say, you know something, when it comes to the protecting the, and again, all our water comes from the ground. What we're sitting on top of is what we drink. The bottom line is we made a decision to spend all that money, and of course the state pushed us for the first 65% of it. The fact is that, listen, the only way we can say for sure that we're going to protect the groundwater is the not basically, and we made the decision to spend the money to do it. Nothing else goes into the ground. And that's, I mean, basically we stopped putting in septic systems 10, 12 years ago. We haven't put any in since then. Everybody waited till the sewer came through, wherever the issue was, and they expanded and they did whatever they did with that sewer capacity. I just can't see us going backwards. I mean, the town didn't change their mind in basically saying, oh, we don't care about protecting the groundwater resources of the town, okay? And here we are at 99% of who we're supposed to be connecting to is doing it. Now, as I said, the other areas of the town, there is some flexibility to do some other things in that section D kind of thing. But the bottom line is when it comes to the history of the town and the problems, yes, I came from Woburn. Yes, I was never going to live in a town that they were ever going to threaten our water supply. And yes, during those interim times, we got into big battles with all the big developments. Okay, UPS was probably the largest one and whatever. And DEP and the state basically said, no, the town's got to protect their water supply. And sewer's coming, okay? And that's the direction you want to all end up. And also, too, just as a point of information, we had over a dozen sewage treatment plants in town. Now, again, sewage treatment plants are basically, and by the way, they're actually tertiary treatment. Those components, we had over 12 of them in town. While we were waiting for sewer came through. We didn't force all those plants to close down. They could have stayed on them, but they all decided to get offline and get right back onto the sewer line.
Because they're
So it's a
expensive to
final.
operate.
Exactly. So I mean, it's if we didn't have all those places jump back on and all these other kinds of things, but again, it made sense because the whole process that we went through to look at what we had, the secondary treatment, some zoning restrictions on aquifer protection, all these things were staggered up for the town to make its final decision, including for the water department, that we weren't going to stick anything in the ground that they had to worry about anymore. Okay? Anything that was built was not going to be a direct pipe into the ground of any aquifer, of any recharge areas, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I know exactly where you're coming from. I think it's not that.
I think maybe I need to explain myself a little better. So
Okay.
you as a board want to impose conditions,
Right.
Impose regulations. When
Right.
you do that, you want to make sure that if they're challenged, that they help.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that you need to make sure your regulations are supported. Instead of stating that this is a zone 2, and therefore you're not allowed to do anything unless we can find anywhere else in the state where they have simply barred any septic systems within a zone 2 area. I think that that's going to be probably not specific enough of a concern to support that imposition of the regulation. I know that.
But again, the issue is the towns never got into it because they went 100% sewer, and then there was no one ever to be building on a septic. So they never got into the fight.
And I understand that the reason for putting that, that area onto the sewer first, and almost at the point where we were forced to do it, was because of the concerns with regards to the systems within the zone 2 area. But of course, we wouldn't be going directly back to where we were before sewer came to town. The majority of the uses and structures located within the zone 2 will still be on the sewer. It's not
Correct.
like we're proposing to take them off the sewer and put them all on septic systems. It would only be new developments. So again, we need to be very, very careful to make sure whatever regulations are put in place are going to be able to be upheld, And in order to do that, we have to be able to very specifically point to why we need to do this rather than impose requirements with regards to percolation rates, distance to water, bodies, and things of that nature that other towns have put in place that do make it more difficult to put in a septic system in certain locations, but don't offhand simply prohibit it. And that's where I'm concerned. It would be the outright prohibition rather than the imposition of increased safety measures.
Well,
So-
I guess,
So
I guess,
think,
go ahead.
if I
Todd
could
wanted to say
just
something.
interject, Paul, is that, so I think what we probably should do is, I think the main area of concern from what we're discussing of the updated regulations would be the required provisions section, and then there's specifics, of course, in the variance section. So if we just start from the very beginning of the regulation, and if we look at the current one and then compare it to the draft, under regulation in addition to state code, the only changes that were made in that beginning section was under 201-24A, where the minimum leaching area was changed from 800 square feet down to 600, and that's a Title V change. So that's there's no choice there. And then if you look at the current regulation under B and C, that's been crossed out because that's part of the Title V regulation. D has remained, and that becomes Section B in the new regulation. C, the perk test rate is instead of 25 minutes an inch, it's now 30 minutes an inch. And then the deep observations can only be performed from March 1st to December 1st. And again, the old regulation said that they could only be performed during March and April, but really they can be performed from March through December 1st. And then there is, because we're talking subsurface sewage and wastewater disposal, Rich and Michelle, when they were reviewing this regulation, felt that it was also important to put in here, because we are protecting groundwater, about an external grease trap for all food establishments. So that would be 201-24. And I think that, Rich, Dr. Meikle, I think we could all agree that the proposed language in the draft in that section would probably be acceptable to everybody. And then we get on to section 201-25, which is essentially, our authority to have the regulation, the purpose of the regulation, and then all of the definitions. And all of the definitions are exactly the same as what they were in the original regulation. And if you look at the original regulation, there's lots of sections that have been crossed out. And the reason those are all crossed out is because those are all included in the state Title V regulation. So that has to be adhered to anyway, and there's no need to kind of rewrite them all in this regulation. And then that, of course, brings us to the provisions. And I think that's where the discussion has to take place around what is written under the provision. So all wastewater discharges that are not connected to the municipal water must be approved by the Chelmsford Board of Health. That was in there before. Any owner of a development must connect its wastewater discharge to municipal sewer when capacity is available. Does everybody agree that that's not unreasonable?
Right.
I agree.
Okay.
Question on that though.
Uh-huh.
If somebody has a septic, don't they have the option of waiting until they fail Title V, or who has that? Is it the distance? What is it that gives them the leeway currently?
Well, again, what we have is that a lot of the, I think what we're talking about, a lot of the existing properties have a sewer pipe available in front of them or near them, okay? And yes, they're the ones that are in kind of a spiral, and the fact is that what are they going to do when their system fails, or they do a Title V for sale or whatever it is? And basically, we've been in the enforcing agent for the town in regards to making them connect up underneath the older bylaw that was modified at town meeting. So bottom, and we still have some discretion about making individuals tie in if, in our opinion, they should be tying in and not have an option to have a subsurface option. And of course, they would get tied into the Zone 2 issue where they'd be high on the list of not being able, they'd have to tie in because they're not going to get approval for a subsurface discharge. Again, there's not a statistically a lot of these existing homes that fall into that category, but there's a few out there. Yes, there are. There's still a few out there.
But there's no qualifications for here. It doesn't say anything about distance or Title V failure.
No, I think it's just a blank statement to make sure that individuals understand that is when capacity is available to them, which whether the future resolves some of that issue or not, that's going to have to be the option they take when it's available.
So we don't have to,
have any option.
As sewer becomes available, they're going to be required to abandon a properly functioning septic system in order to tie in?
Well, no, because 90% of the people I'm talking about, the existing people, have already been notified that they're supposed to have had tied in and found excuses or hardships or whatever. So these are not individuals that don't know. They know there was a pipe in front of the street. They had an option to tie in, and I guess technically, whether they still have an option to tie in, yes.
They would still have the option to tie in. They would grandfather.
Right. Exactly. And I think what's going to happen is the fact that they need to know that it's also still supported, that the regulation is still saying when it's available to you, you should be tying in. And I've said it before, I think personally, that it makes not a lot of sense to me of anybody opting for any subsurface style of discharge cost-wise compared to a tying into a sewer thing. They're night and day. It's always blown my mind how anybody has, again, delaying those costs of any kind is always been out there, and that was part of the struggle trying to get 100% of the people that were out there tied in. We got down to 99% of them. So there are a few, but as I said, I think whether the statement's there or not there, I guess, is not the end of the world. But I don't think it's harmful to anybody, because we're basically talking about the existing properties, and anybody new, they need to know, I think, as Dr. Meikle said, and I think the board has supported before, that the intent here is that the final result, well, we're hoping the final result here in town is that everybody is tied onto the central sewer, and the whole concern about ever-changing things like the thing that Todd just talked about, where, tomorrow they come up with a new list of I don't know what at the measures of trillions, okay, and sit there and say, oh, well, now they're a problem. What are you going to do about it? No, by the way, it's coming out of your homes in your buildings and whatever. So I think the intent always is the only, I believe, prudent thing that you can do, particularly when we've created the infrastructure to do it, and we've spent the money to do it.
And forgive me, but clarify here. I just want to make sure that, because I think that our intent is, we're clear on that. But I just want to make sure we're not sort of by writing a brief statement, that we're not missing something that we had elsewhere, that the people find excuses for variances in this, and that's where the Title V and the sales and all that comes into play. But this isn't rewriting it in a way that is making a major change.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. Hi. Let me just jump in here, okay? And I'm sorry that I had to come on late. But I think that was Paul Haverty that was talking about the vagueness of the Area 2 part of that regulation, Richard.
Yes,
And
it
I have
was.
to
Yep.
agree with him. All right.
Well, the map.
Go
ahead.
I looked at the map. I looked at all this before I had to leave for this wake today. All right.
Mhm.
It is too over encompassing. It's as if we are trying to undo the decision made by the select board, a decision we didn't agree with. Remember, we asked for a full moratorium, and the select board said no. So in our regulation, we can't just come out here with a big brush and say nobody in that area is going to get it. We do have to come down with some criteria. Paul is right. We will never survive a challenge on the way it's written. I'm in agreement with everything in that revised regulation except for this.
Well,
It's not defensible, so we really shouldn't move on it.
No,
My concern is if we pass something that is not defensible and that ultimately gets overturned, in the meantime, you've got no additional protection. Because if the regulations you pass don't survive, then you have no regulations that go above and beyond Title V.
as I had mentioned,
Exactly, and
I want you to be careful to make sure that you don't overreach and wind up not getting any of the protection you're looking to get.
Forgive me, but Todd has had his hand patiently raised for a while. Todd.
Paul, have you looked at the aquifer protection wording?
Excuse me?
Have you looked at the Chelmsford Aquifer Protection Bylaw
Yes.
and the wording of it?
Yep.
I think some of the specificity you're looking for is there. But if you're worried about specificity, one of the things the board could look at in the potential change is California has some very specific guidelines on what they determine or what they call groundwater recharge of recycled water. And basically it's applied to septic systems and on-site waste disposal that directly injects into the ground and requires some very specific things. If you were looking for specificity, I've actually put a request out because trying to go through the California website is kind of painful. So I actually emailed the head of that bureau to see if I could get a copy of those regulations that would give you some specificity you're looking for. But I think in the interim, if you were, because your aquifer protection district is basically the zone 2. And I think the wording in that might give you, and it's so you'd have DEP wording and your own state, your own town voted bylaw that would give you some direction, maybe. Maybe I'm reading it wrong,
Todd,
but those would be the two things I would look at.
What I'm looking for is so that's about half of it, right? I'm looking for the board to be able to state exactly why it is that this greater amount of protection is needed in this area. But I'm also looking for something is very specific as to why this regulation is needed more so than simply increased standards. Right? Why is it that you wouldn't allow to do any septic systems in this area rather than you can't do a septic system unless you meet, this, and this requirement?
well, again,
Exactly.
It could include increased percolation rates. It could include a number of things. And why wouldn't that address your concerns, sufficiently?
So Paul, if you
It
look at,
doesn't, but
Paul, if you look at number 5 under D, under the required provisions, so that's kind of what you're referring to in relation to number 3, making number 3 more specific, correct? So number 5, any development in the non-shaded area will be required to have secondary treatment if, and then there are the guidelines for, if you fall within these guidelines, you need to have secondary treatment. That would, okay.
I think it's D3 that is our main issue here. I
Yeah.
think Todd raised first, and then I was going to go from Todd to Linda's iPad.
Okay, all right, go ahead, Todd. Oh, okay.
I just-
Again, well, bottom
Sorry.
line, there was always the potential here, and that's why, in all seriousness, I needed to bring it in front of the board. Yes, I took if you want to take a hard line up front, if you want to call it that. Okay. The obvious issue is what we have done historically. Okay, is that in these zone twos, and particularly in the commercial areas where there's been large developments, whatever, the option to doing nothing has been, and as I said, we had over 12 of them in town, is tertiary treatment. So that could be the, and maybe that's what we need to add, a de facto option of tertiary treatment, which, by the way, we had 12 tertiary treatment plants in town, right off the top of my head that I could name, okay, that were there in the meantime, protecting the water supply until we got the final solution, which of course was the permanent connection to sewer. Okay, so the tertiary treatment option was always something that, and whether we put it in here specifically or whether it's through a variance process that they can apply for. Yeah, I mean,
When you say tertiary
always have the
treatment,
difficulty.
Are you
Tertiary treatment.
Are you talking about an on-site wastewater treatment facility?
Correct.
Yeah, but that's not going to be,
Regulations wouldn't even apply to that.
What wouldn't apply to that?
These local regulations in excess of Title V. An on-site wastewater treatment facility is approved by DEP. You have no local permitting authority over it. You don't have the right to impose requirements on on-site wastewater treatment facilities that are in excess of what DEP requires.
No, I'm not talking about in excess of. I'm talking about what DEP has approved in the past has been tertiary treatment plans.
Mm-hmm.
The only issue that we ever got into in the past was the fact that DEP has modified their numbers of where they drew a line on how big of a project it was before they started it. Whether it was 10,000 gallons a day, was it 15,000, was it 20,000 kind of thing. So that would be the gray area, okay, in regards to the sizes of the project. And I'm not looking to supersede anything. I mean, if you sit there and say, oh, you need to tertiary treatment as a large project, yes, it's going from us and it's going straight to DEP for their approval for tertiary treatment. Yes, yes. But
So what if we
So
have,
if you impose this requirement,
yes, go
it
ahead.
will prevent the large development coming in and doing an on-site wastewater treatment facility in the zone 2, because this regulation is not applicable to that type of a system.
That's
so
right.
what if it's a
Is there a
residential?
way to sort of push developers from going with, on a subdivision, that has X number of housing lots? Is there a way to push them into doing the wastewater treatment facility option and tell them they can't do the Title V option? I'm not sure how you get there. I mean, I'm not,
And what if
I'm not clear that you
what
can
if
do
it's a residential?
I'm not sure you can do a wastewater treatment facility at under 10,000 gallons per day, even if the developer.
Correct.
Well,
But Richie, we still have the problem with
yes, go ahead.
identifying why in that
No,
district
no.
they have to be treated different.
Well, again,
You still haven't come up with the rationale.
I think it's
well,
easy
the
to
rationale
identify
was
why you need to treat Zone 2 differently.
well
The
because
question
well,
is,
again,
why do you need
That's the
ban
problem.
rather than something more targeted?
the rationale was all the pollution that was coming out of those areas, okay, not just residential, and the commercials too. That and by the way, there's quite a bit of residential that is involved with the zone 2s, too, in the commercial zones and the industrial zones and whatever. But I mean, the obvious issue is, again, as I said, when we got into a big battle, and again, I don't want to preach, believe me, I don't want to preach. We got into a big battle with subdivisions that basically were playing games, and the state slammed them for it, where they were taking commercial or residential developments and splitting them up into smaller lots so they would bypass the issue of triggering the gallons and whatever. And we basically said, well, you're not doing that. well, we can do whatever we want. We're going to go to the state and they're going to override you and not going to do it. The state told them, in fact, they fined one of them $25,000 for playing the game.
And they're
Okay,
more difficult
kind of
with
thing.
that now, too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, as I said, I'm not afraid of the thing. And as I said, that's why I wanted, to draw what I call a strict line, if you want to call it, up front. And if the only thing that we can do at this point is for anything over 10,000 gallons, that there has to be tertiary treatment approved by DEP, whatever. That was always, in all seriousness, that was always what I call a spin-off option under variance. They're sitting there saying, well, we can't do anything and whatever. And the answer is, well, I mean, a good example is one of the things that are in some of our out of the articles is one of the things that we required in the beginning is a geohydro study on a site, which basically we put the onus on them to show us that their land isn't in the zone 2, okay? And therefore, what they had to do and what they didn't have to do.
So, Rich, that's a really good point, and that sort of goes to what I was saying. When you have this blanket prohibition, it's somewhat too restrictive. But then when you talk about the ability to actually provide evidence to show that the need for the site in concern isn't present on the property, that helps.
And again, as I said, in Article not 6, but in 7 or 8, I don't have it right in front of me. It basically talks about a geohydro study, okay? Which basically, if you're in this area, you need to do a geohydro study to show that maybe you're not, somehow magically you're not in the zone, even though all the data is showing, all the soil maps and all the other kinds of stuff. If you overlook all of them, it's amazing. That's why I mentioned when we talked about it was aquifer protection, it was groundwater, zoning, and the zone 2 kind of thing, because in the past 30, 40 years, they called it something different. As Todd brought up, it was the aquifer protection zone for a time. Others called it, groundwater protection zone. There was interim wellhead things that the state come in. They finally come up with real true ones, kind of thing. But what we did throw in, which is still existing in that other article, is that yes, anybody that come in, never mind arguing about what they go do a geohydro study and show us that you're not in that zone. So. As I said, the tertiary thing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Richard, I think that study is something that goes to the variance.
Yes.
If they want a variance, I think that's something that goes to the variance. But I still think we're missing the guts of how you want to change this, again, to make it defensible. I mean, I think we've got to be thinking in terms of why, what would be acceptable in this area, what flow would be acceptable, what developments would. I mean, we have to do more than just whitewash this whole section and say and create such a regulation that nobody will ever be able to get it.
So
we will not survive that.
So Anne Marie, you're saying for Section 3, and I know that you're driving, but where it says any owner with a development located in DEP Zone 2, Aquifer District, or Groundwater Protection Zone and future water district plans will not be approved for any type of groundwater discharge in order to permanently protect. So that wipes out, like you just said, that entire section.
And
so
future water district plans is very, very vague.
Right.
That right there would.
Yeah, and again, it contradicts the select board.
Right.
What you're doing, Richard, and I commend you for it, because we pushed for a blanket full moratorium, and they said no. So we can't now come in the back door with a blanket moratorium as to this section. We have got to have more specifics to deny these people within this district. And so I think that part of the regulation needs revised regulation. I don't think we can vote on that tonight. I think we can vote on everything else, but I think that's got to go back to the drawing board.
Well, we're not going to vote on it tonight anyway, because we have to republish before our next meeting. So tonight was going to be discussion on what we need to do to change. So I guess what we really need to decide, Rich, and you can weigh in on this, is, what language do we add to number 3, D3, if you are in these zones, future water districts, like Paul said, is not strong enough language. Do we just
No,
cross that out, or,
well,
and then
yeah,
do we go with zone 2, aquifer district and groundwater protection zone? And then if you're in any of those areas, what do you additionally have to prove to us? What requirements do you fit in order to be able to put in a septic system?
Would it make sense?
well, as I said, it wouldn't be a septic. It would have to be tertiary treatment. And again, most of the, how do I want to put this? Most
So
of the
tertiary
areas that would-
treatment is for larger systems.
Right.
It's not for residential. So we have to separate these two. It's very
But there
important that
are-
we recognize that there are developments, and they're going to be large developments, and that can be over 10,000 gallons per day, and that will go to DEP. But there's a lot of people out there that have properties that have the right to subdivide their properties and build on them. And those are smaller systems. Those are 440 gallons per day or 550 gallons per day, that type of thing. So how do we have to think of both categories.
So there are a number of ways in which you can do an enhanced Title V system that provides additional protection above and beyond, sort of the base level system under Title V. And you can certainly include a regulation that requires that. And those types of systems, have been approved by DEP, and there are a lot more of them around today than there were back in the 90s. So that is one approach. We can't require them to do a wastewater treatment facility again, because I don't know that DEP will allow those for systems that are less than 10,000 gallons per day. I think that
Right.
there
are regulations out there that
it's not a large
Go ahead.
enough of a system to function properly.
Yeah, and there are many towns that have such regulations. Gloucester, Essex, those towns that are close to the ocean and to waterways.
And I presume
have-
that a lot of them have regulations specific to what is and what is not allowed in Zone 2. So I think what would be
Correct.
here is if you would like me to review these regulations in other towns as they apply to the Zone 2s, to sort of see what the framework is that they use, and whether or not it's something that the board should consider adopting. And if
Well, again, as I said,
that
That's a good idea.
specifically ban septic systems in Zone 2, well, then we know that it doesn't go too far and you can do it.
I would welcome that, Paul. I think Anne Marie just said the same thing, that she would.
Yeah, I
welcome
think that's
Yeah,
a great
absolutely.
idea.
That sounds good. I know that
Yeah.
Todd has been very, very patient for a while now. He's had something to say. Todd.
If you do that, Paul, could you, would that be privileged information for the board, or would it be okay if you send it to us? So we're just trying to keep ahead of this, so that, any potential problems for us in these emerging contaminants, that we stay ahead of, and that we're and I do appreciate, one, you let me come on and speak about the PFAS, but also have some input on this, because it does affect our ability to supply clean and safe water. So I would love to know about whatever you find. And I would recommend also you look at, and I'll send it to Sue, the wording on the California regs on what they call it's recycled water reused for aquifer recharge or whatever, but they apply it to septic systems and they do require treatment on it. It would give you a good regulatory base to at least start on. Whether you can apply it here in Mass where it's from California, that's up to you.
Well, but I'd be happy to look at it. So yeah, some of the limitation is DEP actually has to approve the enhanced treatment for systems. So
No, I know. They're actually also
simply
looking at it.
require a septic system to use enhanced treatment that hasn't been pre-approved by DEP. So it might be something that's allowed in California that's not allowed here. But I'm happy to look at what you have found.
Yeah, and I know they're actually starting to look at it on the wastewater discharge size for well, specifically for PFAS. I know they're they're looking to.
I think it's probably going to make a lot of changes to requirements, this new regulation. I don't think they really fully understand the Pandora's box that they've opened up here and how many different things it's going to impact.
Yeah. And I mean, the treatment you're talking about, look at Littleton. They're going to lose the spectacle pond treatment plant, I believe. Right now, they brought raw water back from another well source. If you go 119 West, there's actually an above ground water main that runs back to Spectacle Pond, and they're blending it there. But I think they're going to stop that and they're building a new plant over where that source is that will treat the minerals, but also for PFAS and things like that. So you're seeing it more and more at the level we're seeing it. I don't think you're going to see any more airs or Westover where you see in the parts per 100, PPT in the hundreds, but you are going to see a lot of the 18s, the 20s, and the 30s. So I think it's going to become more common than not.
Okay, so
And that's all I have to say.
I think we're going to be looking at, or Paul's going to be looking at other examples for how to redo provision 3. What about provisions 4 and 5?
4 and 5 are basically kind of a continuation of what was put in place. Basically, it was the secondary treatment on any size system, and it applied to the smaller ones, which, like you said, DEP has plenty of those other options that are involved. So the other areas,
It's completely.
It's a continuation of what we had back from 96.
So we're
Well,
good
it's
with.
very appropriate for residential as well. So secondary treatment is appropriate language here for a smaller system. It's a separate tank, basically.
So 4 and 5, as a board, that we're okay with the way it's written now. We just
Can I
need to
ask a
set.
question?
Yep.
Rich, looking at 5A,
Yes.
exceeds 440 gallons per Chelmsford building acre. Does that mean 40,000 square feet?
Yes, it does. I wasn't exactly sure whether the number was 40,000 or not. That's what I thought it was, but I just, it was to put it in there because I didn't want to do it on a per acre thing because it would immediately contrast with everything else to do with zoning and permits and whatever. So I sat there and say, no, let's have a number that goes with the town.
So I would suggest, because I don't know that the Chelmsford zoning acre is defined anywhere, that maybe put 440 gallons per 40,000 square feet.
Sure.
So I have a question about that too. So does Chelmsford have a regulation that every piece of property has to be 40,000 square feet to build?
No. There are districts that allow 20,000 square feet.
Okay, so that would be concerning in the sense that, can we back that up? Those words are saying basically that you can't have anything that exceeds the 440 gallons per 40,000 square feet. And I know that we're getting inquiries right now in the office about people that are subdividing their property, and they don't all have 40,000 square feet.
All right,
So would that mean that they can't build their home because they can't provide themselves with an SAF?
Be allowed to have as many bedrooms.
Well, yeah, 440, I think, is a 4-bedroom home.
Right.
Or a 3-bed. Rich, is it 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom?
It's a 4-bedroom home. I mean,
So
a
that says
4-bedroom home.
exceed. It talks about exceeding, and it also, it's not banning them from putting it in. It's saying that they have to have a secondary treatment.
So to clarify, the RC district, the 20,000 square foot requirement.
Yeah.
So the CA zoning district and the CE zoning district has a 10,000 minimum square foot requirement.
Right. And all those small things are all within the Aquifer protection zone, which we're going to get back to and somehow resolve. But so the bottom line is 90%, 95% of the area that's in what I call the white or the non-colored zones, non-shaded zones, are all RA 40,000 square foot lots required. And you
And to
can't subdivide
clarify,
smaller.
this doesn't prohibit, it only requires.
No,
the-
exactly. It just requires it. If you can do
Right.
this, you can go regular septic. If you don't, you got to do treatment. Yes.
So I don't see any
Yeah,
problem.
so I
with
think that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, Michelle.
Yep, neither do I, now that it's explained properly.
Okay, and with regard to the variances, section E, any concerns there in terms of needing to rework it?
It's
I don't have any issues with it. I don't know.
wordy. I'd leave it to town council about variance stuff. It's like it's just a whole bunch of things thrown together. I don't.
that. Well, the way I read this is essentially you've got to be able to prove that it would be a taking.
Right.
If
Right.
it's-
But again, I guess the obvious question for me, always in this way, do we need all that writing to say the same thing that you can say in 3 or 4 sentences? I don't know.
Well, as an attorney, I'd say yes.
Oh yeah, sure, okay. Well, as a regulator, when I was a regulator, the answer was I don't need all this word. Just condense it down to where it needs it, and then go from there.
Okay, so ultimately with regard to 201-24, we're largely okay with that one, that the changes made sense. With regard to 201-25, that the main thing that we want to do is one under D3, look to sort of see what other examples there are that instead of putting a complete prohibition, we'll look at specs for how these could be addressed appropriately and eliminating the line future water district plans as it's too vague. And the second thing is under 5A to clarify instead of acre, it's 40,000 square feet. And Todd has his hands raised, and so he's going to speak now, and he's now unmuted too. Thank you.
So on that part on the future district plans, I think that was referencing the Misty Meadows. We had to submit to DEP for the hearing a preliminary zone 2 for the well area around that we were looking at for Misty Meadows. There's no way to know what it's going to be exactly, but we did send a preliminary zone 2 delineation to state for the hearing. So I think that's what they were referring to.
Yes.
To be honest with you, there aren't between that and the Warren poll, but there's nothing been delineated there either. But the only thing I could think of in that being referenced to was the preliminary zone 2 for Misty Meadows. And that's all I wanted to say about that.
Okay, so maybe if we have
Clear it up.
either with this case or possible future cases, if there's any way to make it more specific, that it wasn't interpreted as vague.
Yeah, because there isn't really any other places we can put a well, to be honest with you, in town. So that's, that was pretty much what I think they were trying to get at with that. And I'll let you go.
Okay. And with regard to the variance section, I think that sounds like we were okay with that beyond wordsmithing, possibly.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We can't tonight. Any other comments on this section?
So I will just say, well, with Paul's help, we will, look at other options. We'll take those, we will incorporate those into an updated draft. And we will post, again, that we'll discuss this in January at our January meeting. It has to be posted twice, with the first posting be a minimum of 14 days before the meeting. And then we could talk about the changes and hopefully vote on it next month. Agreed?
Sounds
When is
very
the January hearing?
It will be the first Monday in January. So actually, I think that's the
Fourth?
3rd or the 4th.
The 4th.
Yeah.
Hey, Rich, do we want to add a season to this regulation too? So
I'm sorry, I
open
didn't-
season start. Do we want to add a season to this as well? Do we want to open the season in March and then close the season at the end of November?
Well, the answer is yeah. We actually already touched on that a little earlier. Yes, about the March to
That's in section.
November
Right.
1st.
That's for soils, though. That's for soils. That's not for installation.
Well, again, we already have that discretion in all seriousness. in Title V that basically says as soon as we say that the soils could be frozen or that the supplies of clean stone and whatever are not available. I mean, under Title V, I've in the past restricted installations because number one, and by the way, we don't have enough left to worry about emergency installations. I mean, you know, I think we talked before, just go to holding tanks for existing. And for new,
Right, I agree with that.
yeah,
So that's
you
something
know,
we can discuss, and then if you
Yes,
decide you want to
absolutely.
put it, you can put
Absolutely.
it into
Yep.
the next draft.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we need any vote to get out of that section, so forgive me, I'm going to move on to incoming correspondence.
Paul,
Yeah.
thank you very
Okay.
much, Paul.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Thank you,
Paul.
Paul.
Have a great night and happy holidays.
You too.
Thank you.
So with regard to incoming correspondence, Anne Marie, we had looked over it a little bit, talked about a couple different sections. It's a big one time, so rather than do a blanket, I was going to break it down and maybe first ask by section or by types. There are spills, solutions, oil release, asbestos.
I did look at them earlier today, Eric,
Okay.
at my office before I left. I looked at them.
We actually
Did you-
completed up to the PFAS section and all that, and then the next thing within
Right.
within that group was going to be the letter that the copy of the letter that I had received regarding Thermo Fisher and Mill Road
Right.
and their chemicals.
Yeah.
And basically, I just included, I had reached out to Gary Ryan because Thermo Fisher has to register all of their products with the fire department so that they know what is on board. And Gary was kind enough to reach out, and he spoke to the safety professional that deals with Thermo Fisher and attached the letter, which was actually written on December 2nd. It was addressed to Chief Ryan, but it talked about compliance with the classification and the labeling of all of the chemicals and all of the different processes and what they actually go through to make sure that they keep things safe at the plant and for the community. So I just wanted the board to know that that was kind of the homework that I did on my end to find out how that plant protects the community members in that neighborhood. And then we also attached, as part of that original email from the concerned person, the fact that they attached all the MSDS sheets, which again, fire has all of those on file.
Okay.
Okay. And then last is did anybody have any questions on that or no?
No.
No.
And then we come up to the GZA presentation.
Okay.
So at the last select board meeting on November 30th, GZA did a presentation at the select board meeting, findings and the summary of the air quality monitoring. And we did post on our agenda for anybody who wanted to go back and view that presentation, the exact part of that meeting where they could actually go in and watch the presentation by GZA at minutes 2803 up to 52.49. And the gist of the entire presentation was that what they found did not show any readings that were over the norm, and that nothing was found to be above what it should be. Everything, all the values they found were below EPA concentrations, and they were below all of the published levels by EPA. And they basically did say that people can smell asphalt well below any type of a hazardous threshold. So depending on individual sensitivities to asphalt and to smell could definitely affect them individually, but based on their findings, nothing was at a hazardous level. And then the board voted, so originally there was discussion about doing an air quality study while the plant was open and then doing a follow-up when they were not open. But it was voted at the select board meeting that it just made sense to do a follow-up study next summer when it's hot, humid, and that's when we got the majority of our complaints in. So that's when they're looking at doing another study, and then they'll be able to compare the data.
What were the dates of the sampling this time?
It was in
Was it
September.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and we actually did post the study on our webpage.
Mhm.
So if anybody wants to go and look at all of the details of the study, they can just go to the Board of Health website and it is on there.
Okay. So, any other questions or comments that we have on incoming correspondence, or does somebody have a motion to accept?
I'll motion to
I'll make a
accept.
motion,
Okay, I'll second it,
whatever,
I'll-
one way or the other.
whichever.
I think that we'll have Anne Marie make motions, and Richard
that's
will
fine.
today.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Passes unanimously. So with regard to outgoing correspondence,
Pretty straightforward. The only one, as you noticed, I wrote a letter in reference to 314 Dunstable Road. Actually, they're proposing a 6-lot subdivision.
Mhm.
And I had been informed by several people that there was a history of this property being used for household and commercial waste, and people were dumping household and commercial waste at this particular property. So I put forth a request that if the planning board approves this subdivision, that it be subject to a 21E.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments about outgoing correspondence?
What was it?
Hearing none, I'll, so I might want to make a motion to accept. Anne Marie,
I'll make it, yep.
Second.
all in favor, say aye.
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 Wonderful. Unanimously approved by the board. Now as to old business. Number one is COVID-19 updates. Do you want to start?
Oh, where do I begin? Can I just make one blanket? I'll make one blanket statement that we're absolutely slammed. That we're doing case follow-up and investigation 7 days a week. Amanda and Darcy are, working just nonstop trying to get cases covered. As of, we do our updates on our website weekly, and we typically do them every Thursday. And as of last Thursday, we had 970 confirmed cases, 68 probable cases, 61 deaths, and we had 119 active cases. And active cases are those cases that are still in isolation. And just to give people an idea of what is going on, I don't think it's any secret, it's been all over the news that every single community is being inundated on a daily basis with confirmed COVID cases. And, Is it all the aftermath of Thanksgiving and gatherings? That's kind of what they're feeling. Our hospitals are feeling the impact. Lowell General is setting up an additional site. They're setting up the site over by UMass Lowell again, like they did in the beginning. That's being set up to basically be able to handle the surge. Chelmsford alone, between Friday and Monday morning, we had 88 additional cases. And just so that people have an idea, one case follow-up probably takes between a half hour to an hour, depending on how many household members there are in the house, who's been a close contact, who's in quarantine, getting the proper information. By the time we get that information, entering into the state Maven system, and then every single person that we contact, we follow up with an email, and we provide that individual with their isolation dates, household members, what their quarantine dates are, what quarantine and isolation actually means. And we put all of that into an email, which then, of course, gives them the support that they need. They have everything that's been told to them in writing, and then it gives them their contact at the health department if they need to reach back out to us with any questions. So the other thing that happened today, which has been all over the news, is the Massachusetts Department of Public Health now once again updated their quarantine guidance. And so for people that, really follow it, it will be 3 weeks this Wednesday that they had updated the guidance as far as being able to get tested on day 8, wait for those results for a couple days, potentially test out of quarantine if you remain asymptomatic by day 10. The guidelines that they came out with today, which now correspond with the CDC guidelines. Basically, I'll just read what came out from the Department of Public Health to us today, basically saying that they've aligned their quarantine recommendations with those issued by CDC, and they go into effect today. And essentially, it's based on recent CDC data showing that shortening the quarantine period results in only a small chance that someone may develop COVID after leaving quarantine. The small risk that someone may develop COVID after a shortened, more strict quarantine period is outweighed by the expected benefit of reduced transmission from the expected increased cooperation with adherence to the quarantine. So they feel that if someone can get out of quarantine a little bit earlier, they're more apt to really adhere to the quarantine guidelines. So if people are told that they have to stay in quarantine, on day 5 in quarantine, they can go and get tested. And it can be either a rapid test or a PCR test. If they have no symptoms, and if that test result is negative, they remain in quarantine through day 7. They can come out of quarantine on day 8, return to normal activities, watching their symptoms, monitoring themselves, wearing their mask, hand washing, etc. through that 14th day. They still need to pay attention to the 14 days. If somebody chooses not to get tested, they will remain in quarantine for 10 days, and they can be released on day 11 as long as they remain asymptomatic. If someone starts developing symptoms during the quarantine period, then it is obviously recommended that they go get tested. And when they do get tested, depending on the results, will depend on, does their quarantine now become an isolation period, or do they still get released on day 10? So that's basically what the guidelines are saying. We have said from the beginning that we will go by whatever DPH guidelines are, and that's what they are effective today. So we already started getting emails from people that were given their quarantine guidelines over the weekend, asking us, oh, how does this change my dates and what happens? The other thing that we're running into, and we did get an email from the state last week, and they said that they sent this email out to the Mass Medical Society because there are some docs out there that a household member is positive means everybody in the household is high risk, particularly if you don't live in a big enough house where you can really totally separate yourself from other people. And some docs are just not testing, and they're just saying if somebody develops symptoms because you're in the same household, to just assume that you're positive. And recommendation from the state is that the docs do test, and that they should be testing these people. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place sometimes here, if the doctor does not test, because now people are asking us, what are my isolation dates and what are my quarantine dates? And really, we need the test result to go by that, because we're not physicians to be able to diagnose. So we're trying to educate any doctor's offices as we speak to them about the fact that they should not be just telling families to assume that you're positive, but they should encourage. And I don't know, Dr. Meikle, if you're aware of that amongst, any of your colleagues, but that is something that we have run into a little bit. And lastly, the only other thing that I will say is people are asking the question, a month ago, when we first went into the red status in Chelmsford, we were in the midst of a cluster and an outbreak in a nursing home. That is not the case. What we are seeing right now is absolute widespread throughout the community. And we're seeing a huge increase in our cases in young adults, late teens to 30. We're seeing a ton of cases in that age range. And oftentimes those individuals have younger children. We're seeing it, just kind of spread through those households. So we're trying to stress as much as we can what we've been talking about in the beginning as far as education with the hand washing, wear your mask, and still social distance, regardless, and try to keep, your pod very, very small. And that's where we're at.
So what I've been bumping into is when I have a phone call with a family who has somebody's positive exposure or otherwise, it's taking me an average 22 minutes to go through it and go through the logic. And what I'm finding with regard to other physicians and other just schools, school nurses, other departments of health, is that sometimes they're being a little simplistic. Oh, somebody's positive, it's 10 days and that's it. And they don't go through the household and explain that if you are, a 2-year-old child is not going to feed itself. And so a child is positive then means that that's minimum 10 days, and it's going to be 14 days of quarantine, or 10 or 7 or 8, depending on where, and we'll come to that in a moment. But that that's added on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that only Pelham Elementary School is the only one that the school nurse routinely tells people like 24 days as of last week for the combined incubation and the quarantine, and tries to sort of explain to people better about, how they're going to prevent going out and spreading it to others.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of sort of confusing information. And I think even in the current 8-day Massachusetts or 7-10-day CDC guidelines, that the incubation time for this disease is still 14 days. And so
Correct.
In explaining to parents and explaining it to patients, making sure that they know that, yes, that there are ways that, it's less likely you can get out and such. But in some cases, when you explain it to parents and they look at the dates and realize that, what, the break's coming up, we might as well just lay low and not race out to the restaurant, because unfortunately a lot of people who get this 7-day, 10-day, whatever, they're not using it to go back to earn money as much as they are to go back to shopping and everything else. And if you tell somebody it's 10 days and you forget to add on the quarantine on the end of an isolation when you have multiple family members, or tell somebody at 7 days that they're free to go do what they want, they think that they don't think that there's any chance that they could be spreading it, and they really throw caution to the wind.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that being careful with that. What did you ask about physicians exactly?
No, I was
Oh,
saying, do you know of, in your arena, of a lot of physicians who are feeling that, because it is so rampant when some person in a family gets it, if they
No,
cannot completely isolate.
there's presumed infections, but I don't know that I've bumped into many physicians who have been doing. That's what we did back when we didn't have testing for it.
Right.
And when testing is now a problem again, that there's a moratorium, Lowell General Hospital will not do testing for travel through at least January 4th. So it's only those that are exposed, those that are symptomatic, they can get tested. And because the testing then it takes you 3 to 4 days to get an appointment, and then it's another 2 days or so after that to get the results. It's not as, unless you schedule it in advance to come out of this quarantine thing, it's not as useful. And in some cases, families have just decided, you know what, we're going to do 14 plus 14. We're going to spend the next 28 days. The whole family's hunkered down, and we'll have somebody deliver food on the doorstep. So sometimes families like that aren't getting tested, but they're not getting tested because, full 14s. They're the exceptions. The other thing the state put out today is that they have, in all hospitals in Massachusetts, they're now banning elective procedures that might require an overnight stay, so that it's kind of a transition back to where we were. Lowell General Hospital has had, on certain days, they've had more patients than they have had staff beds. That's not a policy. It's just people come in like the ER, and so they have been scrambling to make sure that everybody was covered. The cases are, what were a month and a half ago, an average of 6 to 8 patients a day are now 70 patients. And they're talking about opening up the UMass Lowell facility.
Yeah, so I think you'll agree with me that, right now, the biggest thing we can do is wear those masks, wash those hands, and socially distance, and keep your circle very, very small.
Small circle. Don't eat with coworkers. Don't eat with. It's a small circle, and I would recommend people not plan on traveling or getting together for the holidays. Thanksgiving has passed, and I think that, as we expected, there's a surge that's coming out. We're just starting to see this. It's just the start now. Questions or comments?
No. No.
Anne Marie?
Nope, all set.
Okay. It's the other item under old business was Newport Industries odor complaints.
That was basically to cover that air quality study. We've still continued to have some complaints, not nearly as many since the weather has changed. And in all honesty, Donna, do you by any chance off the top of your head, I know you had tallied them for me last week. Do you remember approximately what the total was?
Yeah, we had about 26 complaints, but it came from about 10 people specifically. And that all was ended November 11th. We didn't get any after that. It was the first 10 days.
And I think they're due to shut down very, very soon, by the middle of December, I believe. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Motion to accept old business.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, with regard to new business, the first is domestic animal regulations.
So basically what that involves is we updated our regulations. Now it's been hard to believe it's been a couple of years. And what we have found is each year we've had to kind of to the drawing board to change the language that was originally put in there in regard to having a certified plot plan. which when we had first put that in there, we didn't realize initially just exactly how much that would entail and how much that would cost. So the board had voted each year to change that language and allow us to accept a printout of a GIS mapping from the town website, or for somebody to use a copy of their plot plan from the Northern Middlesex Registry of Deeds. So what I would like to propose, and in the regulation updates that I sent you, you could see in red the changes that that I would like to make. And I'm just going to go through and read them for the people who may be online listening, because they do not necessarily have a copy of these. Basically, if we look at the first page, it talks about the permit being required and enforced, which of course it it still is absolutely required. And we're updating the language to say that at the time of the initial application, instead of a certified plot plan, it will be a site plan from the Middlesex Registry of Deeds or from the town of Chelmsford GIS mapping. And then we basically go through that they have the same language stands as far as showing the structures and the property lines, etc. And then we say an on-site inspection will be performed with that application. And wherever it said plot plan before, that language is being changed to site plan. Okay. The other thing that we would like to do is, up to this point, permits have always expired at the end of December. And that is an extremely challenging time for us to try to get out to all of these sites to do on-site inspections with weather, cold, this year and last year, obviously during the pandemic. But we would like to say that permits will expire on March 31st of each year, so that this year, as people renew their permits, they'll actually be getting an extra 3 months, because this time around, if we change our regulation, the permits would be good until March 31st of 2022. So that's another proposal. Definitions, inspections, all of that remains the same. The only thing that we did under definitions is we added the definition of a site plan, which is a plan showing the entire property, including all the property lines and the existing and proposed structures accurately plotted thereon. So that would change that section. The next page is all of the same.
Page 11.
Sanitary requirements, all of that remains the same. And then the application of the regulation, 201-5-2, basically says that any previously validly issued permit, meaning permits meeting all applicable Board of Health and the provisions of section 195-60 of the Chelmsford zoning bylaws when issued, may be renewed. In the old language basically specifically talked about 2020 in relationship to prior permits. So we're deleting that, and we're basically saying if you're in compliance with all of that, you may be renewed annually. And then all the requirements of the application must be met. So we're just getting rid of that section that we had to vote on every single year about prior permits, because at this point we're beyond that.
So quick question.
Uh-huh.
With regard to the December 31st, March 31st,
Yes.
it's not that every, like, in town, dog license, chicken license, etc. It's not that they all come due on December 31st. We can pick whichever day we want.
Correct.
Is there a season that is either a slow season or better? Because March can be as cold as December.
So the issue is we really can't, we couldn't push it out until June, July, or because beginning in May and then through beginning of July, and Donna, chime in here if you want, that's when we get slammed with all of our restaurants. We have, you know, all of our food establishment renewals, and that entails a lot. So we never, which is why I think it was December 31st, way back when this regulation was first initiated years ago, that you didn't want to have it at the same time frame as other things. January 1st, we have other applications such as dumpsters, refuse haulers, that type of thing. And then in the like I said, May and then July 1st, we've got a lot of the other food establishments. So by us giving ourselves April 1st, it gives us a little bit of a better opportunity, I think.
And you said too cold. This isn't going to be a problem with you in terms of being cold to be out there, frozen ground or otherwise?
Well, granted, we could still have snow on the ground in April because we live in New England. But, you know, like we have snow on the ground now, everybody's expiring the end of December. We did ask that everybody submit their applications by December 1st. So Michelle has already been out there doing inspections on the people who have already applied, trying to get them all in. But unfortunately, because we're in the middle of a pandemic and because we're also dealing with COVID enforcement, she can't fit it all in. But she will get out and do it. So, you know, everybody will get an inspection this year within the next couple of months for this year's renewal, because in all honesty, a lot of people did not get an on-site inspection last year, again, because COVID hit us like a brick. So they will get on-site inspections this year. And then that will carry them through March 31st of 2022. And we best be out of this pandemic by then.
Knock on wood. And March 31st makes better sense to you than September 31st or October 31st. Or sorry, September 30th or October 31st.
So I can
Correct?
I can kind of add into that part of it is, we had some discussion on the concern of going too far out. But most of our permitting is May 31st now, because we had moved a lot up to the May 31st timeframe. So if you want to go further out into that August, September timeframe, as you're saying, Dr. Meikle, that would be fine. Even the end of July would be okay.
As far as inspections are concerned, it's much better to start the inspections, say, in April or May. That's when the ground is clear. That's when we can see, and we have time throughout the summer to do all of them. The ground is clear. You can see more of what you need to see in a chicken coop or in a chicken run, to make sure it's clean, make sure that they're dealing with things appropriately. So winter inspections are more difficult. Spring, summer, fall inspections are much easier.
So we were initially doing the March 31st because it would be much more helpful than the December 31st. But moving it out even further would even be, I think, a little bit more helpful.
Because it sounds like December 31st, and for that matter, the whole May, June restaurant season, those are the big problems. But March doesn't necessarily take care of the cold weather problem that December has, and possibly putting it out to the August or September or October, that might even be better, except for the fact that, you know, people win and they have a year and a half on the next renewal, but it puts it at a better time frame. Yes.
For what? For just doing applications or for inspections?
No, for
two different
inspections. So what do you? So
Okay,
Donna, what about July 1st?
Inspections for me is much better during spring, summer, and fall. So if I can start the inspections in the spring and go through into the fall, that's good.
Michelle, when do they get chickens? When do they get the chicks?
Right.
They can get it. Typically, they get
When
them
does
at
that
the beginning of
bring them in?
So typically they get them in the spring.
Right, so, I mean, you don't want to be inspecting too early because they'll be getting
No,
their
if they
chickens
get,
after that.
if they get them, I want to be out there in the spring. So if they're getting their
Right.
chickens and getting their coops, I want to be there in the spring.
Exactly,
And-
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so that's what's good for me personally. As far as applications are concerned, in the overload on Donna, that's a whole different matter.
So the
So-
timing,
so- I'm sorry, Donna. Adam had just mentioned in the chat that April is when people get the chicks in the stores. So maybe
Right.
if we don't.
That's when I want to start the process.
Right, so that way, if permits expire March 31st, then they would be renewed, April 1st of every year. Are we suggesting that we bump
Right.
that out to May 1st, or do you want to keep it April 1st?
I suggest
Well, I
we
think if
we
they get
keep
them
it
in,
at,
Or just,
go ahead. For me, again, it's when they're getting the chickens. People are purchasing them in the spring. So that's when they're going to get their runs. That's when they're going to build their coops. And that's when I want to inspect. If we have a new chicken person, that's when I want to inspect, right at the beginning of that
So
season.
you like the March,
so wouldn't then May,
I personally
May
like
make
the
more
March
sense?
date. Yeah, I like the March date
Okay.
best,
you're doing
personally.
the inspecting?
so let me just kind of clarify this. So typically Michelle does the inspection. What should be happening is the inspection gets done prior to the actual permit being issued. So if we go to the,
Only for new people.
well, they all have the exact same date.
right.
So if you're looking to,
You're right, the inspection should happen prior to issuing of the permit. Obviously, that did not happen last year because we just physically
Right.
didn't have the capacity to go out and do it. So I guess part of my thought in reference to what Anne Marie, what you were talking about, Eric, too, was that, in April, where if the stores start getting them at the beginning of April and people get them and then there starts to setting up their yard, that then if they are applying, April 1st, I would say if we were going to change that at all, we don't change it any later, make it any later than May 1st. But I think if,
and when do the restaurant applications come in?
they're actually due to get their new permits by May 31st.
but
Okay.
we don't want to encroach too much on that because that's a lot.
So Adam has something in the chat. He's saying this all makes sense for the first time permit requests, but is there anything wrong with scheduling renewal inspections anytime throughout the year as it was done this year, or it was done now?
Right, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I was just saying. So if you have a new applicant, we want to get out there right at the beginning of the season. And then, someone that has been a good chicken person will go, we could go May, June, July, or what have you.
So
Right,
Michelle,
but they fill their application out by April 1st, and then you have that time frame to get out there in the next
Yep.
few months to do the inspection.
Yeah,
Do you say April 1st or April 31st?
April
April-
1st.
I would say April 1st.
would be when they would renew.
And
Yeah.
do you want to have the same date for renewals, or do you want to say the renewals are September 1st or something?
No, we'll keep the same date for all of them.
Okay.
so that's
And
a
April-
change. Okay.
March 1st, which is what you initially. So then I apologize for bringing this up.
No, actually it was, actually, what page was that on, Eric?
It was March 31st, last
March
page.
31st, yeah, so it expires March 31st. And they would be given a permit April 1st, right, Donna?
Yes.
Okay.
So if everybody agrees with all of those changes, then we need a vote by the board to accept the amended changes to the domestic animal regulation.
Okay. Do I have to go for a motion, or can I just propose that we take a vote?
No, you need a motion.
Okay. Anne Marie, do you want to give a motion?
Motion made.
Seconded.
Okay, then with regard to accepting Article 2 domestic animals regulations for the Board of Health as written by Sue today, all in favor say aye.
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 Accepted unanimously.
Yeah, we just have a comment in the chat from Adam. Adam, we're addressing your comment on our next topic.
Okay.
All right, so that takes care of the regulation itself. The next part of business involves the actual permit application.
Mhm.
So as everybody knows, because everybody was involved when we first came up with this, we have a very detailed application form for this. So what we're doing in this new application that that I submitted to you is it's still one application, but if it is a renewal application, then the person that is submitting, so the first time around, they have to get sign off from building, sign off from conservation. If they have a large animal, they have to get sign off from the animal control officer. And then of course we look at the site plan, the property lines, their maintenance plan, etc. And that all has to be very detailed. And if it's not, Michelle will, you know, come back and provide them guidance on you need to provide more detail with this. You need to show us dimensions of this in relation to the size of the coop, the size of the pen, where it is in relation to property lines, where they're keeping their manure pile, etc., etc. And so what we're finding is that most people, once they establish this on their property, keep it in the same place, and they don't typically move it. So what we want to do is we wanted to update the application, which you have before us, and all the demographics are at the top. But then it goes into, if you're a new applicant, you have to complete the entire thing, apply all the supporting documents. You're a renewal application and you don't make changes, so you only have to complete 3 sections out of this. And if you're a renewal application but you're having changes, then you have to list the changes and provide us with whatever supporting documents to support those changes. And so all of the wording throughout the application will be changed from plot plan to site plan because we just accepted the regulation. And they check off the list at the bottom that, you know, it's a single family, etc., the same as before. And then on the last page, they basically say that they are attesting to the fact that everything has remained the same. Nothing has changed. And it's still the same wording that, you know, by applying for this, by, you know, getting this permit, basically they are subject to the Board of Health coming onto their property to do an inspection, and they must grant that position. So that's really the only change, because once people submit their plot plan and everything else, we save all that. We have a system in place now where we scan all of that into the computer, and all of those documents are saved so that we can go back to that address and we know exactly where everything's supposed to be on that property. And so by signing every year that they haven't changed anything, we still have those initial documents that we can refer to. And I think it just streamlines the process. It makes it a little bit easier on us. It makes it definitely easier on the residents who are reapplying.
Question, what's meant by $50 per stable?
Per horse, for people who have horses.
But it's a small animal, no?
No, this is domestic animals. This is the regulation for all the keeping of all domestic animals. So it incorporates, it's not just small.
Okay. Up under for official use only, it says fee small animal, $100 initial, 50 renewal, $50 per stable.
Yeah.
So, okay. Any discussion?
Sue,
Nope.
Nope.
Adam has a question. Well, actually, we can answer his question after you vote. Sorry.
Did you want to say something, Dr. Miko?
No, I was just going to ask if there's a discussion. Otherwise, I'll motion to for a vote.
I'll make a
So
motion.
moved.
Go ahead.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous?
So in answer to your question, Adam, because this has been voted on today and accepted, then yes, you can call the office and you will be sent the updated form to fill out.
Okay, with regard to, that's all new business. Each item was voted on, so I don't think we need to accept it as a whole. With regard to other, I can't believe that any of you people did anything other than tracking COVID cases.
So can I just tell you that I was looking at my report after I typed it up, and I said to Donna, and I said to the other people in the office, I said, this is really sad because this does not for 1 second do any justice to how insane the office has been for the past 9 months.
Yeah.
Because you just can't possibly write it all down.
I think that you told me that you're recruiting 2 of the school nurses half-time starting next week or so.
Yes.
Is that-
Yes. So we have 2 school nurses who they are also members of the MRC, and they have offered to help out extra time when they're not in school. And then we have 2 other nurses who are MRC volunteers that are in the process right now of coming forward to help us out. There's a whole training process, though, that you have through on the state level, because you have to be authorized by the state to go on to their Maven system. There's a training that you have to take for Maven. Then there's a separate training that you're required to take about contact tracing and how to conduct the phone conversations, et cetera, et cetera. So they're in the process. They're just in the beginning processes of doing that now. But hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we will have at least 2, if not 3 more people on board. So I'm happy about that.
Will that suffice?
Probably not, but it will be a big help, that's for sure. And then we probably won't be seeing, the health department won't get involved in the administration of COVID vaccine. Basically what they're telling us is probably until phase 3 or 4 of the rollout. I think initially they're going to be using military, maybe the National Guard, whatever. They're signing contracts with like CVS and that type of thing to do the huge rollout in the beginning of, healthcare workers, first responders, high risk living situations, stuff like that.
So, yeah, I think that they're going mostly CVS, Walgreens, and
Yeah.
The hospital, they got minus 94 fridge installed last week. So they'll have the ability. Okay. Any other comments or questions regarding the other section? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to
No.
accept.
Motion to accept.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And Anne-Marie, did you say aye?
Yep, I did.
Wonderful. So unanimous. And I guess at this point, we will open it up to public input. Did anybody care to voice a comment or concern?
We have Adam on the call and a Linda on the call. If you'd like to speak, if you could unmute.
I'm good, you guys. I appreciate all the work you've been going through with COVID. You were able to squeeze in a chicken form regulation update. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, hearing no other concerns, we will close the public input section. And I think this says January 7th for the next meeting.
It's January 4th.
I thought, yes, January 4th.
Correct.
Okay. So January 4th is our next meeting, 6:15. And what's the progress on having an on-site meeting versus continued Zooms?
They're still expecting to be able to have on-site in January. So I'll keep you updated.
Okay, so we'll just watch that. Otherwise, that's the date. We'll figure out exactly where it's going to be.
Well, and I think honestly, it's going to depend on what's happening with our numbers. If we're still going through the roof like we are right now, then I will not vote for or push for an in attendance meeting, even with masks on.
Go ahead, Sue.
Very
Tell everybody you don't want to see us.
That's not it at all.
Don't mince any words.
Quick question, as you bring that up though, what's happening with the schools?
So the schools are still in session. They're still doing cohorts, cohort A and cohort B. Cohort A is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We do have quite a few students that are out in quarantine because of school spread. It's mostly because of household or outside of school contacts.
But I thought if our positivity rate rose much above 4%, 5%, there's some number there that they were going to consider.
No, they actually never came up with a number.
Okay.
They basically said that they would go by, the state guidance or whatever. And of course, the state guidance is still saying that they really would prefer that the kids are, stay in school. And, I don't want to jinx us, but, I can comfortably say that with as many, cases that we've had that have been positive, if they're in situations where there have been potential exposures within the school, because the school is doing such a fantastic job with, as best they can. I think the challenge with the social distancing, changing of classes and stuff like that at the high school level, it's much more controlled at the other schools, but they're doing a great job with the mandated mask wearing, the distancing, the cohort separating out so that the kids aren't too close to each other in the classroom. So knock on wood, we have not had a single confirmed case of someone that's been identified as far as staffing as a close contact at the school. So kudos to them because they're doing a good job.
Good job. Any other concerns, or I'll entertain a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you for.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yes.
Merry
thank you.
Christmas.
Merry
Thank you very
Christmas.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.